2, Marco. 1, 2. Mandibulise emva kwedinara. Emva kwedinara ngolwesibini sibulise bonke abantu abakhoyo apha kwi-program yethu. My name is Sonobo Stirman. I work for the Nelson Mandela University. I was allocated at the center that advances non-racialism and democracy. I'm the senior manager responsible for advocacy, education, and training. One of the mandates of the center that I work for is to advance the scholarship of engagement, where we tackle, we debunk, dominant discourses that inform our day-to-day basis, our operations, our generic scholarship, our experiences. So we are really delighted to have you guys this afternoon to be part of this critical engagement and this critical scholarship, where we will be talking about a very controversial and highly contested topic in the context of Africa, in the context of the continent that we live in, the issues of the borders in Africa. But mine is not to go into those deep scholarly inputs. We have our esteemed guests whom we have invited from different institutions, whom I believe have read, have written, have studied, are teaching on the subject matter in the context of Africa. Mine was to say we wish to welcome you on behalf of CANRED, on behalf of the Mandela University, as well as the International Office. But what I want to put out there, colleagues, is an invitation as we celebrate Africa Week. This is a week that we were given by the university to remember who we are, to define who we are, to kind of ask ourselves, what kinds of identities are we carrying as Africans? So this is a critical and crucial platform that has been created mainly for African children, the sons of daughters of Africa, to talk about their own experiences. What does this week mean to us? What does Africa Day mean to us? And I'm very glad that there are learners as well from our neighboring township. So we really want to welcome all of you guys. This is a very exciting space. It's a free space. Express yourself however you feel. Talk to us. We want to hear how our African brothers and sisters feel, especially in the entire week. We started off yesterday where we had a grand opening of Africa Week. We were in partnership with the Black Power Society as well as the Black House Collective. We hosted this program at the Missionville campus, one of our kind of neglected campuses of our beautiful Mandela University. We felt as the organizing team that we can have all these glamorous programs in Summerstrand, but we must always remember that we have a large proportion of our students who are based at the Missionville campus whom do not celebrate and receive these programs of this nature. So yesterday we were there. We were talking about Black power, Black consciousness, and Pan-African thought. Very beautiful and robust discussions. And here we are today. We're talking about a campaign that is very big in the context of Africa, whom they talk, or they rather advance, or they imagine a borderless Africa. It is happening now. Then tomorrow we have a roundtable where we are inviting local activists to talk about things that are facing Africa in the context of our constituencies, in our Black townships, in our Black schools, what is happening there as we are celebrating this week. Then on Thursday, beautiful program where we'll be having a debate finale between two schools. We have two high schools from Gqeberha, Then we have 2 high schools from Kariega. They will be debating this topic, the implications of a borderless Africa. So ndifuna ukuthi maqabane nani maqhaweka zonke akhoyo apha siyabulela uba nibe khona sithi khululani ibhatyi sonwabe siqoqe kuba iAfrika yeyethu, Africa belongs to us. Ngalomazwi ke I wish to welcome on the stage, on the podium, on the microphone, the facilitator of the day, usisi uYondela Mwana, olapha naye eMandela University. Ndicela ke simphakamise ngezandla ndizoshenga mna. Enkosi.
Thank you so much, Botsonabo Ndingu. I am Yondela Mwanda. I'm from the, can you guys hear me? I'm from the Innovation Office here at Nelson Mandela. I'm Yondela Mwanda, Ndingu Mamqoti Ngestuko. I'm from a small town called Kofunvaba, and I'm from the Innovation Office. So basically, I'm just going to take you through roughly through our program today. So we have 2 esteemed speakers, like Botsonabo had already said. We've got Dr. Catherine and we've got Dr. Mzileni. And then we have 3 respondents. And then after everyone has spoken, we're going to have a session where we ask questions, where we're going to, everyone is going to participate. And then after that, we're going to have our closing. So it's quite a very brief program. So our first speaker is Dr. Catherine from WITS, a senior researcher. So please welcome her with a round of applause. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hi. Is there any difference with the mic and without? No. Okay, let's get this. Is it? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay, well, hi everyone. It's lovely to be here this afternoon in this beautiful city and this amazing facility. So thank you very much to the university, specifically CANRAD and the International Office for this kind invitation. I'll be tackling the topic of today from a migration perspective because that is the area that I work in and that I research. And I'm trying to be digital, so my talking points are on my phone. And my starting point is that as a continent, will you keep time for me, please? Thank you. Okay. So as a continent, we're making more progress in terms of a borderless Africa on 3 fronts. The economic front, which is basically about the movement of capital or goods, the movement of services, and capital, goods, and services. But we're making less progress on the movement of people. And that's the migration perspective that I'll be talking about. And for me, I believe that the idea of a borderless Africa, or what the African Union refers to as seamless borders in Africa, is an important one. It is not achievable overnight. It is not going to happen tomorrow, but I want to make a case for it here today and say that it's something that we should strive towards. Why? I have 4 points for why we should strive for a borderless Africa in terms of the free movement of people. The first is that the world today is actually already borderless for some and not for others. If you think about global companies, multinationals, you could say that Google, for example, is a company headquartered in America, but it's a global company. So these multinationals, and there are many more, that was just an example, are much stronger than our own individual governments in Africa, or even maybe all of them put together. So in some way, for some people, the world is already global, their capital is moving freely around the world, and there are also those who have the privilege of being able to go anywhere in the world because of where they were born. So think about an American passport or a European passport, which for which the world is your oyster, versus the low worth of an African passport. So the point I'm making here is that if we work towards opening our borders as Africa, it's going to position us in a better place in the world. We are part of the world, and we should also enjoy the same freedoms that other people in the world are enjoying and that we are not, for whatever reason. The second point, why I'm making a case for a borderless Africa in terms of movement of people, is because to deny movement is to deny history. People have always moved, and people will continue to move. So historical migrations in Africa specifically were not governed by any policy or law prior to colonialism. And those forms of migration still continue today. So in other words, Africans, they move not in response to colonial borders, but they move because that's just part of their history. And, you know, their economic imperatives, their social bonds, their similarities between us. And so that will continue to happen. The third point for me, why I make a case for open borders in Africa, is because although people have always moved, like I just said, and I'm not contradicting myself here, research has shown there's a lot more internal migration, meaning, let's say in the case of South Africa, there's more movement of people from maybe the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, or to other parts of the country to Gauteng, than there is of people from other African countries into South Africa, or that there is of Africans into maybe the US or Europe. So research is showing us that only a small portion of people actually move across borders. So the larger movement is happening within countries, and this is what is being referred to as increased urbanization. And this is not regulated by the state, because in South Africa, again, you can live anywhere in the country you choose to, right? So I think maybe there's the emphasis on the international aspect might be a bit overemphasized, yet the issue is not so much that, but rather the internal movement. The other thing is that even when there's movement across borders in terms of the countries that we now have, a lot of it is circular migration. So if you think about the people who are crossing, let's say Beit Bridge, or crossing from Lesotho in the Free State to South Africa, there are thousands of people who are doing that on a daily basis for their livelihoods. So it's ordinary people who are just trying to build a decent and secure life for themselves and their families. And it's not the criminals or the subversives or the invaders that we tend to read about in the newspapers or in the media, or to hear from politicians. The other thing is that even though I've defined or described what the research is saying about trends in migration, the vast majority of Africans actually do not move. So they're very happy to stay where they are, and because that they've established a place that they call home, they have established social bonds. So in terms of the proportion of people who move versus those who stay, unless something happens, war or whatever, most people will actually stay and not move, even when they have the option to move. So my fourth point is that, funny enough, despite the research showing, what I've just described, migration policy in Africa is very much about shutting people out. And this has a colonial history. And I'm really looking forward to, the conversations that we'll have about this. But the colonial history was about fixing people and trying to make sure that they stayed in the same place so that you can rule over them. So migration in Africa, in my opinion, should not be about creating categories of second-class citizens under the guise of the right to self-determination. I think we need to ask ourselves what moral grounds exist for using borders to keep people out. So I'm suggesting that we need to move away from shunning, from the politics of separation, to shun politics of separation and to embrace a politics of humanity. Our social and public institutions in this continent must respect all human beings as moral persons. So the starting point is, I'm human, right? And this entails in recognition some form of the freedom and equality of every human being. And if at all any migration justifications exist, they have to be based on arguments that respect the equal moral worth of individuals. And this is where I see the relevance of Pan-Africanism. And this is where I want to now make 1 or 2 points and then conclude. So I think Pan-Africanism is helpful in the sense that it allows us to reimagine Africa as a borderless space. So we can ask ourselves, how did things work in pre-colonial times? I wasn't there, you weren't there, but we can learn from history. But what we know is that continuous movement was part of how space was organized. There were borders in those days, there were boundaries, but they were crossed without much of a problem. So let's tap into our pre-colonial history to reimagine Africa as a borderless space that doesn't criminalize the movement of people. Another way that Pan-Africanism is relevant, in my view, is that we can build on Pan-Africanist histories around unity, solidarity, shared values, and hospitality to reject the idea of people being treated as second-class citizens based on where they were born, which is actually not their choice, and subhuman treatment, and let's recognize the inherent importance and worth of human beings. I already spoke about this earlier. And related to this is the recognition that the fate or destiny of Africans is greatly intertwined. So a tragedy in one part of Africa affects us all, just as a success anywhere in Africa is a success for all of us. So to conclude, I believe that Pan-Africanism is very compatible with the idea of free movement of people within the continent based on their humanity first and foremost. Humanity is something that we can apply in our own interactions with others. It's not something that we need to leave to our government or to our leaders. Thank you very much.
So we've heard from Dr. Catherine her emphasis on movement and the pros or the advantages of movement in Africa, looking at the economy, looking at infrastructure as well, looking at cultural exchange, but mostly the restoration of human dignity through movement. Because I think if we look at that perspective firstly, looking at people or looking at Africans as humans and the freedom of movement, then we can move from, political freedom, economic freedom. And I look forward to perhaps our second speaker and the respondents, where they actually delve more into families, the importance of families in Africa and how this borderless Africa how that merges and comes together. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mzileni from Zululand, a senior researcher from the Department of Sociology. Kindly welcome him with a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone in the room. As introduced, my name is Dr. Pedro Mzileni. I teach sociology in the Department of Sociology at the University of Zululand. And I want to thank the International Office and the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy for the invite. Thank you for bringing me here to the Eastern Cape. And I want to also welcome everyone in the room, including those who come from our schools. So firstly, on what we are discussing on the table, what I want to acknowledge is, firstly, is the journey this university has traveled to get to this point, to commemorate Africa Liberation Month in this manner. It's not Africa Month, it's not Africa Day, it's Africa Liberation Day, Africa Liberation Month. Why did our heroes and heroines and African intellectuals like Kwame Nkrumah, Mangaliso Sobukwe, Edward Wilmot Blinden emphasize on Africa Liberation Day? It was done to remind all of us of the main core mission of black people in Africa, in the diaspora, and across the world, that we must forever strive for a free and an independent Africa. And every time the month of May arrives, or the 25th of May arrives, we must make an assessment of how far are we in becoming indeed a free and an independent Africa. So that is the key question. Now, the month of May, if you stay in the Eastern Cape, if you stay in South Africa, it must serve as a reminder, firstly, that South Africa, out of the 55, 56 member states we have in the continent, South Africa was the last one, was the last country to obtain independence, which was in 1994. In fact, in the Southern African region, the Southern African region is one region that was the last one to obtain independence. You had Mozambique in 1975, you had Namibia in 1990, you had Zimbabwe in 1980, and then finally South Africa in 1994. Why was the Southern African region the last one to obtain independence? And what does it mean when you're the last one? We were the last one and the recent one because mainly the Southern African region is a settler colonial territory. In other words, European people, white people who colonized, dismembered, raped and killed Africans did not only do that whilst they were in London or in Paris, they did that whilst they also were inside our own territory. So the settlers, the white settlers, are here with us in the continent, inside Southern Africa. Now, when your region is a white settler colony, it means the fundamental crime will be land dispossession. Land dispossession is the fundamental crime that has been committed by the system of colonialism. Now, obviously, you do not colonize people and then they keep quiet. People who are colonized will always fight back. So, the beginning of colonization is also the beginning of decolonization at the same time. So, forms of resistance in Southern Africa, therefore, have always been carried through the armed struggle. So, the armed struggle is the epistemic and the physical project of resistance that has been utilized because the crime of colonialism in our continent and in our region was the one of land dispossession. Now, if you look at the region of the Eastern Cape where we are, this is one region where the armed struggle was taking place. And many people like to refer to the armed struggle only to the formation of Umkhonto weSizwe or Upoqo in the 60s which is not necessarily the case. As far back as the 1600s, the 1700s, and the 1800s, you had wars of resistance taking place in this region of Southern Africa. People like King Inzaka Khawuta is one of the heroes who waged the armed struggle against British colonialism from this region. But the way our heroes are being written about, they always appear as people who were dying in history. So one of the works currently being done by one of the best and proud intellectuals of this university, Nkululeko Mbongwe, he's looking at Uyinza not as a person who was killed in the Ngabaga river banks on the 12th of May, 1835, resisting colonialism, but he wants to look at Uyinza as a philosopher. In other words, resisting colonialism using arms is an attempt and a mission towards a free and an independent Africa. So then the philosophy of one settler, one bullet, therefore, that has been coined across the traditions of black nationalism and the Pan-Africanism was one of the useful tools to utilize to eliminate the white settler in order to achieve liberation. So, let's look at how South Africa was bordered, right? How was Africa bordered before we speak about a borderless Africa? And I see that we have many learners here. I always say to first years, if you want to understand South Africa or you want to understand decolonization, you need to first understand colonization first. You need to understand colonialism in terms of what it is. And you need to look at South Africa as a colonial society. Then you will get a full picture of what is going on. Let go of these rubbish terms that South Africa is a democratic society, it's a non-racial society, it's a free society. Let go of that rubbish. That will confuse you. But once you look at South Africa as a colonial society and Southern Africa as a continent that is still on a decolonial mission, then you'll have a clearer picture of what is going on. So, colonialism. South Africa as a state was not created by black people. This thing called South Africa, it's a colonially created territory that was passed as an act in the British Parliament in 1909. The 1909 British Parliament Act for the Union of South Africa was passed, and South Africa as a nation state was formed on the 31st of May in 1910, with Prime Minister Louis Botha installed on our land as a Prime Minister of this territory called South Africa. So South Africa is a British colony. So when you sing, for those who watch the Springboks, I don't know why, for those who do, when you sing with the white people that in South Africa, our land, you're not talking about the same things, okay? They are celebrating the conquest of Louis Botha in 1910, which is their British colony. When you were conquered, you still need to revive your own definition of who you are and re-establish and redefine your own land so that you can call your soul your own. You are still on that journey. So South Africa, our land, is white people singing about their conquest of 1910. But getting to 1910 was an outcome of the 1886 Berlin Conference. So a few white cheese boys sat in Berlin in Germany, and they decided amongst themselves that we are going to split Africa into pieces of countries in order for Europe to see Africa as a place to extract cheap resources and cheap labor. So The formation of a nation state in Africa was to turn Africans from being independent human beings who own land and to convert them into cheap laborers who will supply Europe with cheap resources. And this agenda was clearly crafted in 1884's Communist Manifesto written by Marx and Engels, who says there that capitalism settles everywhere to create a world after its own image, and it needs state power to manage the common affairs of the bourgeoisie. So nation states in Africa, the states that you see, they are all territories placed there not only to convert Africans to cheap laborers and for cheap resources, but they are also placed there to drive the agenda of to divide and conquer. So divide and conquer is the imperialism now of the colonial project, whereby not only must you enslave Africans as cheap laborers and cheap resources, but in the process of taking their land, you must also kill their cultures, kill their languages, kill their histories, kill their memories, kill their families, basically make them empty bodies without souls, agency, pride, and identity. So once you eliminate who they are, it will be easy, therefore, to divide and conquer them. I'm left with 4 minutes, Chair. I've timed myself perfectly. Now, this project of dismembering, taking land, installing the African nation states, it also needed an epistemic project in order for it to be cemented as an agenda in the minds of Africans. So in other words, not only must colonialism be seen as an outcome of your enslavement, but also in your mind, you must be told and you must believe in your mind and in your soul that maybe I deserved to be colonized, and being a cheap laborer is a place where I deserve to be. So how do white people drive that agenda? They use the education system and also the media system. So universities and schools right across the length and breadth of Southern Africa, they were built to craft a white curriculum that will make you unaware of who you are, unaware of your communities, and basically they crafted an education to totally miseducate a black person in order to achieve this program of divide and conquer. So it also became an epistemic project. Now, I'm just going to outline one intellectual who drove this, who understood why the resistance of colonialism also had to be an intellectual project. Edward Milton Blinden foregrounds for us the indivisible connections between black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. And he says that nationalism is inconceivable without racial pride, patriotism, and black consciousness. He framed an international program that all black people across the world must affirm their blackness wherever they are. In other words, if you are a black person, you are the only body in the world that is black wherever you are in the world. Whether you are in America, whether you are in Egypt, whether you are in South Africa or China or Germany, so long as you carry a black skin, you are black in the eyes of the world. You can be Oprah Winfrey, you are black. You can be Caster Semenya, you are black. You can be Usain Bolt, you are black. You can be Barack Obama, hey man, you are black. So that is why Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who is responsible for the mass killings and the colonial project in Israel, in Palestine, when he spoke at the US Parliament, he acknowledged all presidents of the US except Barack Obama. Why? Because in the eyes of the international white project of supremacy, you remain black wherever you are. That's why Fanon, therefore, as I close, says, In the colonies, therefore, the economic substructure is also a superstructure. The cause is the consequence. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. That is why Marxist analysis, therefore, should always be slightly stretched when you are dealing with the colonial problem. In the colonized South Africa, you are black because you are poor. You are poor because you are black. Those conditions of being decolonized, it's what defines us as people who have been dismembered and crafted into pockets of African states to facilitate cheap labor and cheap resources. Therefore, our liberation would be to unite as black people using black consciousness to fight for our liberation in order to achieve the main mission, which is a free and an independent Africa. For everything else that we are going to have as a discussion, I'll come back during the question and answer session. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mzileni, for that, for unpacking the connection between colonization and the bordered Africa, and what that means for us in this time, being an African in our time. How does that look like for us, for students? And, you know, for the upcoming leaders of Africa and South Africa. And obviously getting to the root of it. Before we can decolonize, before we can have a borderless Africa, we must understand what the implications of a bordered Africa are for us. Next, we have Ms. Fundile Nyaweni, who's an international student and pursuing a PhD in applied mathematics. Kindly welcome her with a round of applause. You can go ahead.
Okay. So, thank you so much for the warm welcome. So I should speak on that.
So you are the first respondent. You can comment on what the guest speakers have spoken on, or what you'd like to share with the audience.
Okay. So I will basically speak on the political implication of a united Africa. So one of the political implications of a united Africa aims to transcend colonial imposed borders, fostering a continent-wide identity and cooperative framework that can propel development and self-determination. So political implication will actually enhance political unity and stability. Eradication of colonial legacies. A borderless Africa will actually seek to dismantle the artificial borders established by colonial powers, which have often sources of conflict and division. So by redefining natural borders, a Pan-African promotes a unity and solidarity. So it will also promote unified governance and structure. The creation of political bodies to African Union, but with more robust power, we could actually foster collective decisions making, stronger and informed of policy aimed at peace and security. This will actually also promote global political influence. A unified Africa would actually have a more substantial presence on the global stage with enhanced bargaining power in the international organizations such as United Nations, World Trade Organization, and others. And this unity will help in advocating for fairer trade terms and greater political respect. Also, it will actually, in terms of political implication, a borderless Africa could actually lead to the development of continental defense force, reducing reliance on foreign military interventions and addressing international conflicts and more effectively through an African solution. In terms of education, since I'm an international student, in terms of education, this will actually help a lot because if you can imagine a unified Africa, whereby the fees, as an international student, I pay a lot of fees to study here than students who are already studying, who are South Africans. So with a unified Africa, the fees could be actually subsidized for us as international students. So you can imagine if it's not borderless, if we have a borderless Africa, we could have those fees being actually reduced. Also, in terms of socio-economic implication, the establishment of a borderless Africa would facilitate the creation of single markets, which will actually allow for free movement of goods, as they have said. Some of the speakers have pointed out services and capital and labor. This integration could significantly boost intra-African trade and reduce costs and foster economic growth. Also, in terms of industry and infrastructure development, a unified economy policy could enable coordinated investment, infrastructure projects such as transcontinental highways, railways, and energy grids, promoting industrialization and reducing disparities between regions. In terms of social and cultural cohesion, Pan-African identity, promoting a borderless Africa will actually emphasize a shared cultural and historical identity, fostering a sense of unity and belonging among diverse ethnic and linguistic groups. And this cultural cohesion can actually strengthen social solidarity and reduce ethnic tensions, because we all know how it is. And then also a reduction of socio-economic, a borderless Africa would actually allow for equitable distribution and management of natural resources, ensuring that wealth generated from these resources benefits all regions, and this can actually help mitigate the economic disparities that currently exist between nations. Also, it could also address the poverty and unemployment. So the free movement, as Dr. Catherine was talking about, the free movement of people can help in terms of balancing the labor markets with individuals moving to areas with better job opportunities, thus reducing unemployment and poverty rates. I think I'll end here. Thank you.
I think we are slowly actually getting to where I want to get to. I also have a couple of questions, but we'll wait for that on the second session. Sibuyela Embo, and that's basically what Mzileni was highlighting, that before we can bring about any innovation, we need to Sibuyela Embo, go back to our roots, go back and see what worked and what didn't work, and why are we here. And once we move from there, we can actually go back to say, now this is how we can innovate and change, and this is how we can bring about change. I love how Ms. Fundile spoke about trade. Trade goes back, way back in our history. We exchanged those who have cattle for, there were cattle for sheep or whatever. You know, there were different types of trade that was taking place. And an open market would actually help us as a whole African nation to have free movement of goods and services, the costs, and that is going to impact our economy. So we have our second respondent, and she is an LLB student and highly passionate and an advocate about Pan-Africanism. You may take over. Thank you. Kindly, sorry?
It's fine.
All right. Is it my mic or your mic?
I think mine is fine.
All right.
Yeah.
Kindly welcome her with a round of applause. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce her name. Her name is Ndogozo.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As she's already stated, my name is Ndogozo Mudenda. I am an LLB student who's currently pursuing her education here in South Africa, and I am Zimbabwean, so which means I migrated here to study here. So my tackle on this topic is looking at the socio-economic implications on you and I. How will a borderless Africa affect you and I, right? How will it integrate or affect our children as we continue to grow and reproduce, right? So when we look at one of Africa Union's ideologies or aims is integration. So when we look at integration, we are talking about a union, right? Which falls under what a Pan-Africanist person believes in, which is the unification of all African nations becoming one. But when you look at this ideology, is it realistic? When we look at Africa as a whole, is it achievable? Africa is huge, meaning that there is a lot of cultures that come in, a lot of political ideas that come in. Will a unification of Africa actually achieve a unification of these cultures? How will we deal with this, right? So when we look at the socio-economic issues that will come with a borderless Africa or a seamless Africa, we have to be very realistic. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in 2 years, because there's a lot of issues that each African nation is dealing with, whether it's political or whether it's issues that have to deal with inequality, it's issues that have to do with inflation, it's issues that have to do with issues like xenophobia, right? It's something that we need to talk about if we're going to talk about a borderless Africa, is how are the people within the countries or the nations that are so strong in their culture and in their beliefs, how are they open to receiving other African migrants coming in? What implications does it have on the ones coming in and the ones that are already within Africa? As we already see that ideas like xenophobia and ideas like racism, a person is not born xenophobic, a person is not born racist. It's an idea that is taught, and then is it innate, or it's something that we are taught around us, something that we see, and then we tend to believe that just because Dogozo came and she's from Zimbabwe, she's coming here to take my job. Am I really coming to take your job? Am I? Right, but someone else is going to say, no, she's here because she wants to come and take my job, right? So as we can see that when we are looking at issues of unifying Africa, there are certain stages that need to be dealt with before we actually get to that, right? So can these little problems that already exist within these African nations be dealt with in isolation? Can we deal with them as nations alone? In terms of inequality or imbalances in education or crime. So when we look at a borderless Africa and other people coming in as well, we need to also understand that there will be an increase in crime, right? These are things that we need to deal with. I know that there's debaters in here, right? Are you guys here? Okay. So you need to look at things like that, right? How will it affect the income? You know, social grants that are being given out now. Can the government actually, is the government being consistent with them? So if it's failing to be consistent with them, with the South Africans that are present, what then happens when more migrants come in? How does it implicate the refugees? What implications does it have on those? What implications does it have on other Africans? Are we going to be able to take care of them in terms of jobs, in terms of housing? We already have those problems present, right? So what's going to happen? What steps must be taken for us to achieve this? These are realistic issues that we have to deal with and look at. And for now, I think this is all I have to say. I will answer more questions as they come in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ntokozo. Our last respondent is Mr. Mxolisi Mdletswa, who's doing his master's in political science and who has an interest in conflict resolution. Kindly welcome him with a round of applause.
Molweni. Igama lami ngumxolisi Nomdletshe. So in this case, I'm going to respond to both speakers. I'm going to start with Dr. Mzileni. So in this case, the last shall be first. I will first extract something from Stephen Bantu Biko. It's on the article titled "We Blacks." You know, he wrote it under his alias Frank Talk. One can extract from our indigenous cultures a lot of positive virtues. We should teach the Westerners a lesson or two. The oneness of community, for instance, is at the heart of our culture. The easiness which Africans communicate with each other is not forced by authority, but is inherent in the makeup of African people. Thus, whereas the white family can stay in an area without knowing its neighbors, Africans develop a sense of belonging to the community within a short time of coming together. You know, I notice a disconnect between South Africans, black people who stay here in South Africa, and the continent, the entire continent itself. There's a serious disconnect. We do not have, as black people who stay here in South Africa, we do not have a relationship with the continent. Umzekelo, maybe you're a football fan. Maybe there are football fans here. Let's say maybe Mamelodi Sundowns is playing a CAF game. As the supporters of football in this country will say, Sundowns idlala Afrika kule veki, you know. It's like we're not here. It's like we're not in Africa, and I believe that this could have a connection with, you know, with the fact that Dr. Mzileni brought, that South Africa was the last to gain independence out of all these African states. Another issue that I have, Dr. spoke about the African Union and the fact that African Union is also trying to achieve seamless movement of people in this continent, which is great. You know, I acknowledge that. However, I'm concerned about the institution itself. It seems compromised. Recently I learned that the African Union, the building itself, was built by China as a gift, and I do not take gifts, you know, lightly. Another thing that I learned was that the Peace and Security building that is also situated in the headquarters of the African Union was built by Germany also as a gift, you know. So it's things like that you know that give me a lot of anxiety. They give me a lot of anxiety because it seems like whatever we want to achieve with this Borderless Africa, mission might be impossible if there are people who give us such gifts in such strategic organizations such as the African Union. So it's concerning to me. Another issue is, I was watching an interview. There was Aliko Dangote. Apparently, this man is the richest man in Africa. Aliko Dangote is from Nigeria. So, Aliko Dangote was complaining about visas. He was complaining that whenever he needs to move around Africa, he needs to go to the embassy to apply for a visa. That's very strenuous. It's one of the things that we grapple with as Africans. That is why we do not travel enough around our continent. And as South Africans, we know that we do not have someone who can complain, someone who is that influential, who can complain about visas and then everybody listens. We know who the rich are, as Dr. Mzileni has alluded to that. And the rich can actually move to Europe, where they belong, obviously. And they can travel up to 26 countries with one visa. In Africa, it's not possible. And it's something that we need to speak about. I know that when we speak about a borderless Africa, when we speak about the prospects of a borderless Africa, these borders are artificial, by the way. We cannot see them. So whenever we speak about the prospects of a borderless Africa, a lot of people bring about issues such as security, conflicts. They say we will see a resurgence of conflicts if we have a borderless Africa. But for how long will we have the conflicts that are ongoing right now if we do not have a borderless Africa? Because if we do not have a borderless Africa, then we will never find measures to mitigate the conflicts that are currently ongoing in the continent right now. I think I will just stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if you can start discussing or...
Yes, so now we're going to open for everyone to ask questions. You are more than welcome to ask questions in your mother tongue, and we will try to translate. Siateta, Reabua, and yes, and we'll also just accommodate those who cannot hear and speak isiXhosa as well. So we'll be translating. Dr. Mzileni, over to you. Did you want to say something? All right. So questions. So I'm going to take two questions per session so that we don't forget them. Then they answer, and then we take it back to the floor. 2 questions. So noted, sir. Anyone else? The gentleman with the red hat. And then we'll get back to you, sir. Thank you. The mic. May I please have the mic? All right. No, it's fine. It's fine. The mic is being taken to them.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, the speaker has given me an opportunity to ask 2 questions, but I think I had like 5 questions. And probably each question was going to each particular speaker. Starting with Ms. Fundile, I think your topic was about political implication of a united Africa. My question is to you is, how would the removal of the of borders influence regional power dynamics and the balance of influence among African countries? So the reason why I'm saying this is, if they do remove borders, hypothetically, we do understand that there's a greater migration from north to south, right? So my question to you is, how will that influence the regional power? Because, of course, if they remove the borders, I'm Zimbabwean, then I might as well come here. I'm Malawian, I might as well come to South Africa. I'm East African, I might as well come to South Africa. So how will that influence the regional power dynamics? That's question one to you. Question two to you, I think this one will go to more to Ms. Mtokozo. It is, what strategies could be employed to foster social cohesion and mitigate xenophobia and discrimination in a borderless Africa? That's a question to you, Ms. Mtokozo.
Can you just move the mic a bit? Ntokozo, were you able to hear him? Yeah, maybe.
I'm going to repeat it. What strategies could be employed to foster social cohesion and mitigate xenophobia and discrimination in a borderless Africa?
Thank you. Thank you. We can only do 2 per person. It can't be 5 questions.
No, one more.
All right, okay. No, can you say it's only 2? If you can take a seat. Who was the second speaker?
He has his hands up, the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to appreciate our speakers. Thank you for your presentation. Well, I'm Daniel Oyibode Akintola. Well, I've heard about how we got to where we are today in Africa. Thank you, Doctor, for that wonderful reminder about the history of our land. And I want to appreciate individuals also, as we have spoken about the immigration and so on and so forth. Now, one of the questions that I have in mind to ask my brother, I just asked about that now, but I want to say this, that how can we get all this wonderful discussion, information that we are sharing here to our leaders so that they will be able to implement it? Because for me, I look at the situation, I discover that all what we need to make this thing work, to make our unity to work in Africa, we have them. The only thing I just discovered is that some of our leaders, because of their own selfishness, because of their own, self-centered ideology, they did not want this unity that we are talking about to work. In the sense that they are the one that these people that we said that they've caused this experience that we are having in Africa. I don't want to mention specifically so that I will not be heard for for speaking that way, because I know what could happen when it comes to African matter and with the other part of the world. Now, I'm sensing from this China coming in to give us aid, to support us one way or the other, that they are also trying to penetrate us in order to colonize us again. Because that is what I see with their hate to us. Now, what are we going to do to make sure that all this discussion that we're having here are getting there, so that those people over there, because we know they are in charge, they are the one that can implement those things. All these things we are saying here, we can only discuss. If we didn't let them know about it, nothing could be done. So how are we going to do to tackle that? Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, I can go first. I feel like we are having a discussion that is stuck in the colonial framing of Africa. And we're just unable, Prasobs, to escape this 1886 Berlin Conference template of Africa when we're having these these discussions. Because the panel is big and I have less time, let me make a practical case study, short example to drive the point home. Let's take Marikana, right? The Marikana massacre on 16 August 2012. And let's also take the collapse of the building at George next door. Let me use those two examples to show you the danger of the colonial framework of Africa and why we keep going around the same circle. And migration studies also stuck in this colonial framework as well. In Marikana, you have platinum there. Marikana is a township in northwest, Rustenburg. Beneath that township, there is the best stone of platinum you could find in the whole world. How many of you drink Oros? You know Oros most? You know when you buy Oros at Spa? You can't drink it most the way you bought it. What must you do to drink Oros? You dilute it with water, isn't it? Now, the platinum available across the whole world, it's platinum that is diluted. Are we together? The platinum in Marikana, Rustenburg, it's the one that is the most precious stone you could find in the whole world. It's the most costly, the most expensive platinum in the world that makes trillions and trillions of US dollars in profits. But why would your land have platinum of that value, yet there's no free education for your youth? Yet there's poor schools from where you come from. It is because the platinum might be in Africa physically, but the ownership and control of the platinum is in Britain. The very same Britain that colonized Southern Africa. That is at the core of the problem. But here's another issue. Colonial systems have a technique of putting black faces in systems, replacing white faces with black faces to create the illusion to you that they've now changed and they now belong to you, they are for you. In Marikana, the mine there was Lonmin, a British mining firm that runs platinum in South Africa. Who was the biggest shareholder of that mine when the massacre happened? It was Cyril Ramaphosa, the person currently who is the head of state in South Africa. Cyril was a black face put inside the mining firm to represent white interests who are behind him, who control the affairs of that mine. But here's a funny issue. The workers in Marikana were protesting for a living wage in the mine. They were not protesting for the ownership and control of the platinum. They were protesting for a living wage. Who are those workers? Those workers came from the Eastern Cape. They came from KwaZulu-Natal. They came from Mpumalanga. They came from Zimbabwe. They came from Swaziland, Lesotho, Malawi, Congo, Angola, Namibia, Mozambique. They came from all over the continent, and they were being exploited as cheap laborers in that mine. That mine, that black shareholder I've just named, used black bullets of the black state to kill all those Africans who were protesting as workers in defense of white British monopoly capital. Right? Let's go to George. A building collapses in the middle of the city. Who are the workers there? The workers come from the Eastern Cape, from Lesotho, from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, from Congo. What does that tell you? What that means is, so long as the ownership and control of the mineral wealth is in the hands of white people in Africa, no black person is free. Every black person will forever live next to their graveyard, so long as you live in an Africa that is controlled by white people and white Europeans. You will forever be cheap laborers who will gallivant, move around this continent looking for secondary enemies, instead of addressing the core enemy that is facing you as black people in Africa. So the discussion about who moves where, it becomes irrelevant when the wealth is in the hands of foreign white Europeans, until you address the question of the independence, until you destroy imperialism, until you destroy the cutting of this continent into countries in order for capital to flow. You will forever come on this panel and talk about xenophobia, democracy, cheap laborers, jobs, and all those things. Of course, that is the imperialist trap of the discussion. We must forever discuss those minor things, because the way the continent is framed and it is being run is still in the colonial imperialist template that makes you as a black person subhuman in your continent, whilst foreign colonial white people remain in control of your resources. That is why, Gemnage, I will always be persuaded by the philosophy of the Pan-Africanist Congress, that if you want to take ownership of your land, control your destiny, determine your future, there must be one bullet for each settler. That is how we are going to achieve our liberation. You do not negotiate with settlers. Settlers who have shown complete disregard for the demands of Africans. There is no other way out of settler colonialism rather than to say settler for one bullet. The armed struggle is the one that will deliver the liberation that we want. And that armed struggle must be carried through with an intellectual project. The intellectual project at the moment is the decolonial theories we are providing for our students. When I said these things again, at the University of the Free State, because I'm a lecturer who calls things by their names, you know. When I said these things at the University of the Free State, they thought that I was joking or mince my words, and students loved these lessons, because one thing you can't deny about Sobukwe, about Biko, about Oyeronge Oyewumi, all these black African, Pan-Africanist intellectuals have articulated, they remain so concrete and real in the philosophies they provided us. Their ideas are nowhere near the grave. The people's ideas who are heading to the grave are these ones who spoke about non-racialism, social justice. There was even a diversity month here in this university to advance this dying idea I'm talking about. All those ideas are heading to the grave. But the ideas of outstanding philosophers that I've mentioned, they are still living up until today. And we must continue to embrace them in schools, in our families, in our communities, and they are going to continue liberating us. Stop imbibing colonial education, because colonial education has one purpose on the black person. It makes you want you to think that you are better than other black people. It makes you want to believe that you are no longer part of black people. So black people go to university, they get certificates, they get salaries. They go stay far away from black people, and they think in their minds that they are now better than other black people. In fact, they are no longer part of black people's problems. Well, Blinden tells you every day, wherever you go around the world, you will continue being black. You can be Barack Obama, Caster Semenya, you are black.
Okay, thank you for your question, which is basically what strategies can we implement that can mitigate or reduce social issues like xenophobia. And I think when I go back to what he just said as well, when we look at the colonialism time frame and the mindset and the implications that it's posed on us, is a black-on-black violence that is still prevalent within Africa, right? And this black-on-black violence can contribute to a slowdown of a movement towards a borderless Africa. So how can we then reduce that, or how can we change that? I think the first thing that we need to understand is that the borderless Africa does not completely eradicate xenophobia or other social implications that come with it, right? It just means that when we are working towards that, it all starts with you and I. It starts with our mindset. What happens in a family? Beliefs and ideologies are passed from generation to generation, right? So when you grew up, you were taught that Ubuntu is something that is important in our society, right? And that is a belief that you've gained from your surroundings or your family. It's the same way we can change our mindset now and say it ends with me. That black on black violence ends with me, and my children will not participate in that. So I think that is one way that a mitigation of xenophobia can be achieved, is through education and through a change in mindset, and then wanting to actually implement it, meaning you have to act towards it, you have to act towards the mitigation. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
I hope I got your question correctly. It says, how will removal power influence political power regional dynamics? Is it? Can you repeat it again? How would the removal of borders? Okay. So if there is actually removal of borders, that will actually help a lot in terms of, because remember, everything starts with a discussion. We have to, they have to come together and discuss how things will actually work. Because remember, we are not saying the borderless Africa, we're not saying that these countries don't have political power, right? Each country will still have its own way of doing things, and there will still be those leaders. But we are not actually removing the political powers from the leaders. But what is happening is that we are creating that borderless so that people can be able people are going to be actually free. So that means leaders will have to come together and talk it out, because everything begins with the discussion. They will have to come together and talk things out and make sure that they align roles, that they will actually, because they have to be rules even though it's borderless, there have to be rules that they actually make. So they will have to make new rules now that will actually fit into the borderless Africa. I hope I've answered your question.
All right, so we'll take 2 more questions. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. There's a gentleman in front.
Molweni ke landlu ngiyazibusela ku chairperson ndize ku Mr Mzileni bengicela ukubuza ku Mr Mzileni question nokuba ngaba uke wathi South Africa ligama lisuka eBritain implementwa eBritain ezibangela xesha ka-1909. So to me it seems uba ndiconfuse ndikhule kusithiwa South Africa, so bengicela ubuza South Africa beyintoni before. Enkosi.
Is this on? Oh, yes. Hectic. Good afternoon, I think it is, to everybody. My question is also to Dr. Mzileni. You spoke of an armed struggle that is necessary in order to implement a change. What do you have to say to the fact that it's not going to be met without resistance, especially considering the pseudo-independent nation that rests in the Northern Cape and one that is being brought up in the Western Cape. Let's say that does happen in any case. How then do we deal with the neocolonialism that still remains in place even without the powers that be or the colonial powers that be?
Thank you. I just want to translate the first question from the gentleman it is directed to Dr. Mzileni about the statement he made about South Africa. Sorry, about the statement he made about South Africa. So the gentleman was asking, before the British named it South Africa, what was it called? I hope I captured him correctly. Thank you. Where's the mic? Dr. Mzileni, those are the two questions.
Thank you very much. Well, the colonizers, when they came to Africa, like I said, they first split the continent into pieces for them to extract cheap resources and cheap labor. They gave colonial names to these countries and these territories. You had Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia, which have now been renamed to Zambia and Zimbabwe. You had Copper Volta, which has now been renamed to Burkina Faso. You have the Gold Coast, which has now been renamed to Ghana. But South Africa remained South Africa, like how the British Parliament named it. Yet, we are fully aware that this was the land of Azania, you know? So, land dispossession and the conquest and the conquer of black people, it's something that has not been addressed in South Africa. You know, when the Organization of African Unity was formed on the 25th of May, 1963, and people who are in the room must go dig the work that defined the formation of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity. Not the African Union, eh? Not this one formed by Thabo Mbeki, this neoliberal nonsense we have. Right? Because the African Union, Hilary Beckless calls it the Durban delusion. It was formed in Durban, actually. 2009, 2001, 2002, around that time. It threw away the program of reparations for the enslavement and the dispossession and the mutilation of Africans. So Mbeki told the whole world and the diaspora that this thing of demanding reparations from Europeans, let's let it go. So in the diaspora, he's recognized now as a sellout for throwing out that agenda. So the OAU's mission is the one that personally I'm persuaded on, because it wanted to address all the outstanding vestiges of coloniality. The armed struggle, one settler, one bullet, it's not how the AfriForum describes it. Because the AfriForum now is taking black people to court to say your own philosophies of liberation is genocide. It's what's another word? Not also. It's hate speech. It's all these rubbish terms they come up with to blackmail black people in their own land, by the way, right? One settler, one bullet is a philosophy of struggle. It is the implementation of what Malcolm X says: we must fight for our independence by all means necessary. What he means is, let us use the epistemic option. Let us use the political option. Let us even use the armed option. All options that we have derived from our own concrete conditions that we see on the ground. They are the ones that will liberate us and restore the land back to the hands of black people. This liberal approach, Kangugaitobi no Ramaphosa, that we can have the land back through Section 25. We need to go to the Constitutional Court and pay compensation. 0 rand is also compensation. There is no land that will be delivered through the judiciary, the neoliberal colonial judiciary. The land will be restored through a political program. Right? That's how the land is going to be restored back into the hands of black people. So, I mean, the Constitutional Court can't even support the national health insurance. If you take national health insurance now on a judicial review, the courts will kick it out. A simple thing that when you go, if you live para and you want to go to a private hospital to get the panato, which is something I encourage, let Amapara and everyone who is poor access quality health care in a free democratic society. Right? Now, if the judiciary can't even give you a national health insurance, how much more to the land? They will definitely kick it out. So, I think the political option for me is the best feasible instrument to use to return the land. Because either way, when the colonizer was taking this land, they mutilated King Inza, Kakaud, in Ngabaha River Banks, in the Ngabaha River Banks, with a straight bullet, and they took his head to London. That's how cruel they were when they were taking this land. So now when we are restoring our land, why must we be nice and lovey-dovey?
Thank you. We're taking our last 2 questions, and then we're closing it. Preferably learners this time. Can we have learners ask questions? The gentleman at the back. And then I saw someone. Yes, sir. The gentleman on the right. Please put your hand up so that they can give you the mic. Thank you.
And then number 2?
Gentleman.
All right,
Yes,
so the
sir.
first learner and the second learner.
Yes,
All right, thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Firstly, my name is Oluetu Feni, and I'm from Phakamisa High School. Actually, I'm not here to ask a question. I was just wanted to make some few things about Mr. Mzileni in the Bayteti, Klenda Bayteta. Apevekini, I was watching YouTube, Penuel show. She's Penuel show. Ku-Penuel show, which is Penuel shows into the politicians, which is Mr. Mpho Kataka. Mr. Mpho Kataka is a previous financial advisor of Vice President Ramaphosa. He was speaking about lendo yeka Eskom, that into yeka Eskom uba sigcinye umbane yonke lando. Kukho ingxaki ezininzi ento lena malunga nayo. So apha kulento ka Eskom bekusithiwa bakukho izinto i-power stations ezikhoyo ezisempumalanga that are actually functioning but ezingasetyenziswayo. Then ke kukho i-power station lena thina siyisebenzisayo automatically lena senzelwa kuyo umbane. And ke kukho le into bekhe wayimention about uRamaphosa being part of Eskom and having shares apha ku Eskom. Into bendifuna uyithetha leyo actually to follow up.
All right, thank you so much.
To Mr. Mzileni.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
My name is Musume Pakis. I just want to ask a question to you, sir. You mentioned that Africans are forgetting their country. And I want to ask a question, how we may encourage them to realize that they are Africans?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Okay, it's on. It's not easy, you know. I don't want to end up saying what Dr. Mzileni said because I don't want to end up saying what he said because I really need this qualification, man. But you know, at the end of the day, we know what actually blocks us from having relationships with ourselves. You know, all these stiff stipulations that are put into place, you know, making traveling very difficult for us. You know, another thing, I mean, I believe that you're a fan of football yourself. I made an example about football earlier, right? If you watch maybe a Bafana match, maybe Bafana is playing in TRC, you'll only see maybe five supporters, you know. So I actually support this initiative of a borderless Africa because I actually envision Africa where people move around their continent freely without any fear of, you know, of getting killed or anything. Because when I look at conflicts in Africa right now, I can't help it but to feel like, I will call it a feeling because I will be accused of being unscientific if I call it anything else. I feel like some of these conflicts that are happening in Africa right now benefit certain people out there. These people do not want these conflicts to stop, you know, because they benefit from them. When these conflicts are going on in Africa, they happen as a distraction, you know, and these people keep on extracting our resources, you know. And you saw, I believe you watched the news. I hope they did report it. I hope they did report the attempted coup in DRC. And these are things, I believe that these are things that we get distracted with, you know. Yes, sir. I believe I answered your question. I hope so.
So the last question, before the last remarks, I have a question for Dr. Catherine about migration. So what are the possible challenges that could arise in managing the migration flows across regions with different levels of development and governance?
Thank you. Thank you. Is it on? Just can't seem to tell when it's on and when it's off. Is it on now? Okay, sorry. Sorry. I'm going to answer this in a very roundabout way by just going back to some of the things that have come up during this very engaging discussion. And I mean, how do we get ourselves not to think as South Africans or Kenyans or Tanzanians? Because I think, and it's kind of going back to what my fellow panelist was trying to say, we can't really move forward if we're forever coming back to those divisions. I don't see what there is, why it would be a big deal to manage anything if we all acknowledge that we're all black and we're all the same. I don't see where the problem arises. I don't even see where the issue of social cohesion and xenophobia is coming in when in a country like South Africa, you've got Italians, you've got Israelis, Jews, you've got the British, you've got the Dutch. Nobody talks about xenophobia or social cohesion. Diversity, it's a rainbow nation for some people, but when you're talking about a Nigerian or a Zimbabwean or a Kenyan, then you talk about xenophobia. I mean, are there different degrees of blackness? And I mean, this is what again has been talked about, the idea of making black people think that they're different, or there's some blacks who are better off than other blacks. or that as a black person you can treat another black person as inferior to yourself, you know? I mean, let's just get over that, and let's not say it's just our leaders. Let's just talk about how one reacts when you hear a Nigerian accent in South Africa, how one reacts when they think that everybody is coming down. I don't know where, please show me the data about everybody will come down. This idea that South Africa is the best, or it's, you know, where does that come from? For me, I'm sorry to say, but then we need to challenge our minds. So that really is my answer, but if I can say something else, I mean, I've talked about basically the self-hatred of black people for each other. We need to get over that, and yeah, starting with how we treat each other. The rainbow nation cannot be a rainbow nation for the privileged, for the wealthy, but not for others. We also cannot divorce the conflicts on the continent from those borders that we are still insisting on. I mean, they were divided. You know, we didn't become states just during colonization. I think what first happened in terms of that history, when they were sitting in Berlin, they were dividing territories to say, this is ours, this is yours, amongst themselves. So, and they were part of empires. So, for example, Kenya was part of British East Africa. In West Africa, they became French subjects. They had like French citizenship in Cameroon. It was later now, during the fight for independence, that they said, okay, fine, let's transfer the same system we have of states in Europe to Africa. Of course, it didn't work, and it's not working. So it's very important to just take a step back and challenge what is a South African. Does anybody here, it would be nice to know actually, does anybody here own a piece of land in South Africa? Could anyone put up their hand just to show me which part of South Africa they own? So indeed the land question is important, but also let's challenge this idea. It's an imagination. It's not real when you say a border. When you come from, let's say, the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, did you go over a fence? Did you, I don't know, like, these things are imaginaries, and I don't know how to simplify them in a way that people understand that they're not real, and we really should just act like they're not there. It will make things a lot more easier, a lot cheaper, that money can be used for better things. Thank you.
Just doing the last remarks for the speakers. Just 1 minute each to close it up. 1 minute, Doc. 1 minute.
I would say to wrap it up, I completely agree with Catherine. I think that was spot on. The colonial project, it's also about divide and conquer, like I said at the beginning. Even amongst the South Africans themselves, Catherine, the Xhosas have been made to believe that they are different from someone who comes from the Zulu or the Sotho kingdom. And these ideas are entrenched through the epistemic project, you know. There's the deployment of the media, fiction, even formal academic education. It feeds into these colonial constructions to make them real. Maybe to wrap it up, I would say that colonialism mutilated our cultures, our histories, our economies, our family ties. You know, we don't actually can accurately tell who we are and who are we related to as a people after that type of violent dismemberment has happened, there's also been a displacement of people.
Thank you, Doc.
Lastly, sorry, one more. To Ntokozo and Fundile, Nomgolis, I agree with the three of you fully. I think what needs to happen is the movement of people at such a high number into Southern Africa is as a result of the destruction of the continent. The destruction of the continent by international capital and its collaboration with political powers in different countries in the African continent. That destruction of the continent is causing all these movements of people, and it gets to become a conflict because even in Southern Africa, you are dealing with people also who are trying to survive and live just like everybody else in the continent. That's why I therefore say the solution out of this is for an Africa that is completely free and independent to own and control its own land and its own wealth, so that no one can have a need to feel displaced in order to have a good quality of life.
Okay, good afternoon once again. So just to round it up, I think that a borderless Africa is achievable, but it is going to take time, and it is going to take a lot of conversations and willingness from people, from governments to come together and deal with the certain issues like the land issue that is at hand and other issues that can come up and will come up over and over again. So I think it is achievable. It's just a matter of time and, yeah, just a change in mindset and agreement.
Thank you.
I hate to do this, but I fully agree with Dr. Mzileni, because our problems, start with landlessness. When you do not own anything, you'll be subject to a lot of abuse, and we can all agree that what colonialism did was emasculating us as Africans, and it's necessary for us to do away with all that thinking. Let's stop imagining all these borders that are keeping us in one place. Just for once, envision Africa as a borderless continent. And also, I would like to thank everybody who showed up to this event, and I would like to also thank Conrad and the International Office of Nelson Mandela University for organizing such. And thank you so much to Dr. Mzileni for coming home, and giving us something. And thank you so much to also Dr. Catherine. We appreciate your presence, Doctor. Thank you.
Your last remarks.
Oh, okay. Borderless Africa, just to say, it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be difficult. It's like, take it as you and your siblings are fighting. Do you always agree at some point? So with the Borderless Africa, it's gonna be like that. It's not gonna be easy, but at the end, with your siblings, how does things go eventually? You come to an understanding. So likewise with the Borderless Africa, people will have to come to an understanding, and we have to be patient with one another, but it is possible to achieve it.
Oh, I thought I made my closing remarks, but thank you for a second opportunity. I'll just say, let's be proudly African, and let's love being black.
Thank you so much for being such an engaging audience, and thank you to all our speakers for gracing us with their presence and their knowledge. So we have Dr. Latola Nehemiah, who's going to give us the vote of thanks, and then after he's done, the learners will leave first, come out of the door and turn on your right, and then afterwards everyone can go out. First the learners and then the rest of us. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Dr. Latola had to leave, but thank you to our facilitator, Ms. Yondela. Thank you so much. And thank you to our speakers, Dr. Catherine and Dr. Mzileni, as well as our respondents, Ufundile, Ms. Ndogozo, as well as Olisi. And yeah, so on behalf of the Mandela International Office and the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, would like to extend our heartfelt thank you to everyone who's here for forming part of this audience today. We'd also like to send a special thank you to the organizers from Kenred, Sonwabo, Zanele Novuyo, who are not here today, as well as Ms. Scott. And I see Prof. Ngomezulu joined us. Thank you very much, sir. And from the International Office, Carlton and Nandi, as well as the whole International Office team, as well as Madiba's Radio, who was broadcasting live. We'd also like to send a special thank you to the activist from Kariga, activists from Bayland and Pagamisa High School learners, as well as everyone in the audience for the engagement. Thank you very much. Lastly, we'd also like to present our speakers and excellent facilitators with gifts of appreciation. Thank you very much. So I think this is the part where the learners can stand up and leave and then grab something to eat. Can we get a picture of everyone, the learners? You can. Colleagues, can we please request the learners to exit first? Learners to exit. Please, a drop. Might as well. I'm going to pretend to speak.